Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. What is the spiritual dimension of being human? I posed that question to today's guest, my friend and colleague, Mabeth Hudson. Mabeth and I met over a decade ago through the Episcopal Church, specifically because she served on the search committee that called me to my current congregation. And I will tell you that it was very clear to this pastor that Mabeth is a person who thinks about what she is feeling and incorporates the spirituality of humanity in her seeking and sharing wisdom in the service of love, goodness, and joy. And in the spirit of those three things, we talk about grief and sadness and the messy ways in which all those feelings and emotions are connected with the spirituality of our humanity. We talked about silence and discernment, taking the time to be with the restlessness that you and I feel when things aren't quite right, but we aren't sure what to do, what choice to make, or what, if anything, needs to change. Mabeth is passionate about the spiritual well-being in people, organizations, and our world. In 2002, she felt a calling to leave the practice of law and co-found Well for the Journey, a Maryland nonprofit that encourages spiritual well-being through innovative programming and resources. She believes that each one of us can help heal our world by attending to our innate goodness and deepening relationships with one another, ourselves, and all of creation. Change begins from within. So while the holidays were still in front of us when we recorded, and we do talk about joy and grief at the holidays, I believe that what we discuss in this conversation is as relevant now, a few weeks later, as it was then. It's a new year with new expectations, new joys, and new griefs. So I hope this conversation prompts some tenderness and care if there is some grief in your life these days. And I also hope it prompts some attentiveness to the spiritual nature of your humanity on this particular day. Thanks so much for listening. Hi there, Mabeth Hudson.
Hi, Ariane Rice. How are you
today?
Dreary day of a rain and ice.
I know. The last three conversations I've recorded have all been during dreary, rainy Baltimore days.
Interesting.
I know. So thank you for making time for this conversation with me. And I think I want to start by asking you, what drew you to that topic of grief, period? What drew you to want to facilitate, teach, read, talk, dig into what most people spend a lot of energy trying to avoid?
Yes, they do. So I began to get intrigued, I think, with grief. I took a class I have in my master's program at Loyola on loss and bereavement. And the teacher put a box of Kleenex in front of all of our spots as we sat down the first day. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? The fascinating thing about this class is it was so healing because he describes in the class and taught in the class the natural human emotion that we all have, the natural human reaction to loss. And his mantra through the class was change equals loss equals grief. Change equals loss equals grief. And he repeated that, and he did a lot of workplace grief. So anytime there's a change involves a loss, and the loss leads to the natural human emotion of grief. And it's going to be different in scope for everybody. But I just found that was such a fascinating class because nobody ever wants to talk about grief. but yet it's so powerful because if you open it up and acknowledge that these are the natural human emotions, it doesn't hold its power over you anymore. And you can, it's the best way to describe it, you can move through it and people become lighter when they talk about it.
Hmm. So this was part, you said, of a master's program. So what was the master's program?
So I completed, after my legal career, I ended up getting a master's in spiritual and pastoral care at Loyola University of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, that was like being a kid in a candy shop. It was just awesome. I loved going to school.
Seems like it would have so much to do with the law profession.
Yes, a completely different career path.
So what happened there? What was it? Why did you run towards the law profession, and then why did you leave it behind?
Oh, I was fascinated with constitutional law in college, and I like the thinking process of lawyering. And I did go to law school in Atlanta at Emory. And then I came out and I practiced law. I did transactional work, and that was bringing people together to solve a problem or get a transaction closed or get a deal closed. But along the way, I felt this kind of underlying discontent or yearning or restlessness that, like, is this the right match for me? Am I doing what I feel like I'm called to do? I don't know. And it just kept growing. And so then I tried to pay attention to this restlessness, and that got me in spiritual direction, which then I tried to listen for where I was being called. Long process. I'm shrinking it into a very smaller statement, but over the course of a couple of years of spiritual direction, then in a group setting, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm called to be doing this anymore. And I didn't know what it was that I was called to do, but I was brave enough, and discontent enough, I guess, that I told my partners, and I had the ideal job practicing law part-time as a partner with people that I loved. And, but I said, I feel like I'm being called to something else, and I don't know what that is, but I need to stop and listen because I was way too busy doing everything as a mother of 3 children at the time as well, practicing law, volunteered out the wazoo.
Oh my gosh. What was it that was making you do all these things?
Oh gosh, Harriet. My personality.
Same.
I take on so much when I take on so much.
Well, that's connected a little bit with the larger topic with the capital G. What is it about taking on so much, you think, that some of us, myself included, sometimes do?
Oh, I was just reading. It's so fascinating that you asked that, because I was just thinking about my personality. I'm a number 7 on the Enneagram.
And say what that is a little bit.
And that is the enthusiast.
Okay.
Which means that I do a ton. I keep really busy. I'm energetic, enthusiastic. And what I read about it this morning is that I was like, oh, I should revisit this because I'm in a transition of sorts right now. And I was like, what is the 7? What are the growing edges of the 7? And the growing edges of the 7 are that we keep so busy, we don't pay attention to the pain and the grief. So it comes full circle. So here we are. So if you're a number 7 out there, that is, just pay attention to it, because that's like the thing that can be very liberating when we, and all the personality types have some element of this, but when we lean into our growing edges, it's life-giving for not only for me, but for others around me.
So one of the questions, just going back into your story a little bit, is, first, as a clergy person, I meet a lot of clergy people who had a first career, oftentimes in some sort of legal capacity. It's typically, it seems to me, like the performing arts, which was me, legal career, law career, police, even judicial kind of stuff. And then it's almost as if that first career exploration is around black and white thinking. And there's a right and a wrong and a good and a bad and the just and the unjust. And it's all very clear. And then there's this sense of being called or wanting or desiring, sort of like, is this it? Is this all there is? Are these really all the answers? And then somehow that leads through a circuitous path into the clergy life or spiritual exploration.
Interesting.
Well,
And a life of service, by the way, like you're
and all
yeah.
of them are life of service, right? They're all about a greater good sort of thing. What do you think happens? What do you think, if you think back to that time, what was going on in your life?
You know, I think my soul was not aligned with my actions.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, so I feel like I was very out of alignment, and I think my inner discontent and inner restlessness kept nudging, eating away at me until I finally said, okay, I've got to pay attention to this. And, the alternative way is to numb over it, of course, which we in our society have a lot of ways to do that.
Well, there's numbing over it, and there's just telling yourself, too bad, you made your choice and this is what you're sticking with. And I'm asking the question too, because I do think people resonate with this story and appreciate that sort of affirmation. And also because it's not a process that ends.
Yes. Oh, yes, completely. Well, I'm in this process now. Like I said, I have a broken ankle right now that I broke in October. And I was on a like a walk, like a meditative walk. And my foot slipped out from underneath me. And then I have a broken ankle and I can't walk for weeks and weeks, so I'm immobile, planted in place. And I feel like I'm in a threshold time, and I'm trying to pay attention to, okay, what does this open up to? What am I being invited to let go of? What am I invited to take on? And where is my focus going to be when I emerge from my little cocoon of sitting in my lazy boy recliner while my bones heal?
Mm-hmm.
It's just very interesting. It's the ongoing cycle of that.
It's funny because the question that occurred to me when you were saying that, and also connected with the question of calling and being called, who's doing the calling and who's asking you these questions?
Oh, I've been thinking about that too. I've asked the same thing. Is it God? Is it my soul? Is it all the above? Is it the greater good out there? Is it the benevolent force, that loving source that I believe exists, that is inviting me to something, into wholeness in some way, into being stronger, into being more authentic, more vulnerable, more everything. So it's just like I feel like I'm being formed again. Like, and we all go through I believe we go through processes in life where, crises of all forms come, and we are called to let go of certain things and take on new things. But in the middle is the mess, right? It's William Bridges talks about that in the transitions. I think that there's any kind of transition involves an ending and a beginning, and that middle place, which is so disconcerting and uncertain and confusing. The middle, the desert, the wilderness,
I know. And I think that we're kind of in the middle place all the time. And I feel one of the feelings I think about has to do with restlessness. So even when I'm feeling planted in a position or a calling or a career or a vocation or a project, there's this sort of now what? And I'm not a huge Enneagram expert, but I'm a number 1, which is an idealist. And I definitely relate to always thinking it's going to get to some place of perfection.
Yes.
And then being disappointed.
Right.
I never, ever get there. So to me, all of this too, and this transitions and even the letting go and even, grief, to me, I think most people associate that word with death in particular, or some sort of suffering.
Absolutely. And really death of a loved one. Otherwise they don't acknowledge it. People don't appreciate that it could be loss of a dream. It could be loss of a hope, a loss of a relationship. Somebody moves away. My husband, when I was taking that loss and bereavement class, he put in his resignation at a large company that he had worked for 20 years, and his 25 years actually. And one of his close friends and his boss stopped talking to him. And he was my husband was so baffled, and he said, I don't understand. I was like, oh, I can tell you that is grief, because grief manifests itself so differently with everybody. It's very unique. And so it's the subtle aspect of that. I believe if we all appreciated what people we encounter are dealing with, we'd be so much kinder to each other.
Yes.
People are carrying so much, and you in your world and me in my world, in our professions, we know that. We know how much people are carrying. It's just makes me so sad, because people think that everybody looks perfect on their social media and, Instagram and Facebook, and their lives are so perfect. No, everybody is dealing with stuff. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it is heartbreaking to me that, because I hear people talk about other people, and I hear people's comparing themselves. Comparison is the thief of joy.
Right.
And I don't know. It's just, it's very hard right now. I think it's a very hard time, because there's so much grief that people still have about the pandemic that people don't even know they're still carrying. Like the graduations that weren't in person, the proms that kids didn't get to have. I mean, my kids are all older, but I mean, there's just there was so much loss during that time that we lived through, and people are there's still tentacles of it everywhere.
You're making me remember that last night driving home, I listened to parents being interviewed who had a child that was killed in Sandy Hook. The anniversary was yesterday, and even though it's been 11 years, I think, it's heartbreaking listening to that. And they were talking about the ways they navigate, this time, not just this anniversary, and also the Christmas holiday coming up and the holidays coming up. And then on the cover of one of my online newspapers this morning was profile of 12 children lost to gun violence this year, of the millions or thousands or whatever horribly high number. And I was like, I can't watch this right now. Yeah. I felt, and it's this feeling of a real obligation to put faces to people. And also it's too much to take in.
Yes. And so when we do have grief, that's being kind to yourself is so important. So that's what you just described. Okay, I cannot take anything else in right now. Like, I've got to be kind to myself. And in those times of grief, we often try to talk ourselves out of the feelings. Oh, stiff upper lip. Everybody else has it so much worse. Just compare back to the comparison, but in that, the things that we carry are real. They're real. And so that self-compassion and kindness, being kind to ourselves, is so important. But it's really, really hard to get to that point unless you acknowledge that, yes, I am sad. That makes me sad. Like what you just described, you said, this is really hard. I can't do this right now.
One of the things you do in your work is you go into workspaces and you talk about things we don't talk about in work. On the one hand, you do talk about grief, and then you also talk about joy.
Yes. Well, they go hand in hand.
What?
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
So I know they go hand in hand. And as someone who has occasionally gone into more professional spaces to talk about spiritual things, it's always the sort of funny wall you're breaking down, because people are like, but I'm at work. We don't talk about that, but I have no compunction to not talk about it.
Yeah.
And usually that's why I'm there. So can you just say a little bit about what got you into doing that and what the experience of that is as you do it?
Yes. So I have a dear friend and who she's a life coach, and she works with a lot of big companies doing life coaching, executive coaching. She was talking about some upcoming workshops that she had about about wellbeing at work. That was her theme. And this was going into, actually, we were starting to experience the pandemic. And I said, well, so we were talking and I said, well, you're going to touch on the grief part, right? She goes, what are you talking about? And I said, I explained that there's been so much change and loss. It's a major issue in the workplace right now. It's a major it's a major issue on the face of the planet. Everybody was experiencing. It was such a rare thing to have that kind of collective grief. And she said, well, say more about that. She was leaning into it. She was so intrigued. And she came back to me a couple of weeks later and she goes, I think this was a big miss. We want to bring you on our team to do this. And I was like, well, describe to me what you're thinking. And so the way we approached it was as a well-being to kind of help name some of the feelings that some of the experiences and feelings that people were having related to their work. And people were captivated. It was very interesting.
Say a little bit about what captivated people. Can you be specific?
I think that people were relieved and intrigued about back to what grief is, like a reaction to change and loss. And it's a reaction to the loss. And people think of grief as somebody's died. And things did die, things did change. Hopes and dreams died, the way we worked, the way we interacted with people. I mean, the loneliness that was everywhere. And people's aspirations. I mean, people lost jobs for heaven's sakes, but workplaces changed in every single way. So to name that for people was very liberating. And I had somebody very high up at a corporation. We got this feedback after, I don't know, a couple of weeks later. And my friend called and she said, I heard that the president of the company watched the video or watched the webcast and started crying at your part when you were talking about the grief, because I was just trying to normalize it for people. Right. That's what people need this is what it is. This feelings that you're feeling, this restless, this sleeplessness, sadness, discontent, the array of feelings that everybody was experiencing. And then to help give tools to navigate that and help people understand that everybody grieves differently, that there's no timeline, that there's no right or wrong way to do it. And that unusual behavior that you may be seeing in your colleague, that could be grief.
Right.
And then giving people, and it's interesting because self-compassion is one of those big tools that we gave everybody, was just being kind to yourself and gentle with yourself as you're navigating those tougher feelings, those tougher emotions.
One of the things that we've lost too, I think, in workplace situations is any sort of reality that we can compartmentalize who we are.
Oh, yes, completely. Well, I believe that our minds, bodies, and souls know we can't compartmentalize.
And so, but that ability, compartmentalization can sometimes can be helpful, and then can be taken to an extreme, and then we completely deny aspects of things that we're not thinking or feeling.
Right.
But that's been hard, bringing more of our whole human selves.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's still a lot of resistance about that.
Huge.
Yeah. And I mean,
well, nothing's landed. Like we haven't gotten to the next thing.
Well, are we ever going to get to the next thing?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, you were like, I think we're always in that middle place. So we need to just learn how to ride it then. Like we need to just learn how to navigate the rough terrain day in and day out.
What, if you don't mind sharing, as somebody who, your mother died 2 years ago?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my mother-in-law died 2 years, and my mother died. All of my mother and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law all died around the holidays. Yeah.
Interesting. They all died around the holidays.
Yeah, it's crazy. My mother died December 17th, so 2 days from now. And it's crazy that they all died around the holidays. So these times are all they are poignant and emotional. And, if I just start crying suddenly, where I might try to push it away for years, my younger self might have been like, but now I just pause and say, okay, yeah, here it is. And let that flow through. And, it's interesting. So I have I think it's there's a Rabbi Nachman who has this saying, and when your heart breaks, take your timer, put a timer on, let that heart break for a while, but then don't, that you have to also have the joy in there too. So it was something about like truly honoring the heartbreak and honoring the sadness. And when you do that, you can find the joy.
Well, what do you think it is about joy that needs the grief?
I think it expands our hearts and souls. It expands us. And grief is out of love. Like grief is a reaction. We grieve the things that we lost that we loved.
Mm-hmm.
We grieve the people. We grieve the relationships that, people. I have a dear friend who moved away years ago, and I was shocked at how sad I was. Like, I felt like I was in mourning and I was like, what is that? I was shocked. And when, frequently when kids go off to college, people are overwhelmed with the grief. And they're like, well, we've been working to get you launched and now you're going, but I really don't want you to go, and my heart's so sad. And it's
so this is a huge aspect of my life right now.
Sorry, it is.
That's okay.
So hard.
I expect it to be very hard. And, it's interesting because in a way I've had some practice because of getting divorced and moving through shared custody, which was exceedingly hard. And I am grateful for the support I have of other people who have lived through it. I think that's a piece of grief. You're going through something that, so many people have gone through, right? And so there was a part of me that thought, this is ridiculous that I'm struggling with this so much when everybody does this. Even thinking about my daughter going to college, I see plenty of people such as yourself. You've survived this time. And I'm like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. People tell me, by the time it's time for her to leave, you're going to be like, get out of my house because it's time.
Yep.
But
you'll also be sad at the same time.
No, I know I will be sad. I have already started I told my therapist the other day, I'm basically in the gestation period of her leaving. So I am taking time to be present to the feelings I have towards that in preparation, because, that thing you just said about saying goodbye to a friend. I think sometimes when we say goodbye in situations like that, it kind of taps into all the goodbyes and every goodbye.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And if we don't allow that sadness to come in, the next time we experience the sadness, it's piled on top, right? It's pile upon pile upon pile, and then it buries us. Like that's what.
I think that's exactly why it's harder around the holidays sometimes, because the other thing we're piling on top of ourselves is the way it's supposed to be.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Or maybe the way it was and it can't be now.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And I think it's our expectation. Yeah. It's the expectation that everything should be wonderful and joyful right now. And I think the very realistic thing that we should all be saying is it's a mixture of emotions at this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
And, I see people like, you and I talk about this all the time, like families this time of year, the forgiveness issues that have to come up, the challenges related to the intimate relationships of families that we've been living with for years. And you kind of hope that it might get a little bit better, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does. And
in my podcasting take-in world, all the podcasts I listen to, 2 of them are on the topic of family estrangement right now.
Oh, yes, there's a lot of that. And that's a lot of grief, even though it may feel like very legitimate, so to speak, but that's grief.
Mm-hmm.
Family that's no longer feels like a family.
Right. And that's why I think the quality of disappointment, paying attention to disappointment, is part of grief and getting healthy about how we hold our own grief.
Yes.
Acknowledging what disappoints us and then self-compassionately trying to talk ourselves through it or feel our way through it.
And there's so much science that shows just even acknowledging it is such a powerful step. And but that's what's happened in our society. We don't even acknowledge it because it's like the part that we don't want to pay attention to because it's not positive and cheerful. And believe me, I try to be positive and cheerful.
Yes,
but
you do. I call you sometimes when I need some cheering up.
I do, but you have to allow the other ones in too. Like and I've learned that the hard way. After the grief after my mother died, and we had a lot of family things going on after that. And I was like, I need to put myself in timeout here and just go cry by myself for a while.
Why? What was happening that you don't have to get specific if you don't want to, but I mean, what were the feelings what was the clue that you were like, I need a timeout?
That's a great question. What was my inner, like what was happening inside, not the external events.
Right. What was the internal flag?
Right. The internal events. Oh gosh, I just felt such conflict. Like I should be doing this, but I can't do this. Like it was the shoulds that had piled up inside of me, like a sense of despair and sadness that I couldn't fix a situation. And so I had to get to a place of acceptance, which I just think is another huge spiritual theme that, because so much suffering comes from failing to accept what is. But the whole process of acceptance involves a lot of grief.
Yep.
So I needed to get to this is the way it is. And then I just had to process all the sadness. Yes, that's the way it is. And
well, you were saying all the shoulds.
Yeah.
Piling on top. And in my experiences, they're internal shoulds.
Yes.
That are based on a lot of things. And it's also the way I want to be perceived by other people or the way I believe they're mad at me for not being a way they want me to be.
Yes.
So again, the disappointment and being okay with disappointing people.
Yeah. That's big.
That's huge grief too, because I can't be everything to everybody. And certain people I seem to consistently disappoint no matter what I do.
Well, there we go. We've accepted it. I mean, actually, as a number 7, it was a huge life lesson, not life lesson. It's something I continue to work on, but I cannot be all things to all people. I tell this story. So this is, predecessor 2 ministers before you, Ben Smith. He came to the house. This is when I was in my mid-30s, again, doing everything, overextended. And he came to my house to brainstorm something. That's all it was. He was seeking my wisdom about something. He sat down at my kitchen counter and he was like, Mabeth, let me, I have this situation. Who do you think would be good for this? And, I thought about it. I was like, well, Ben, I could help you with this. And he just paused and he said, Mabeth, I have the need to save you from yourself. Actually, I think it was, I feel the need to save you from yourself. And I was like, I just burst out laughing. Like, I was like, oh, thank you so much for saving me from myself. But it is this mantra. Sometimes he sits on my shoulders. He's passed now, but sometimes he sits on my shoulders. So he goes, Mabeth, you need to be saved from yourself.
How do you find asking for help?
Well, right now I'm really, really good at it because
you had to be.
I'm so disabled and it's taken me a long time. Well, I'm 62 now. So it's taken me a lot of life to be able to ask for help. Now, there's certain situations when I had this vision for Well for the Journey, which we formed out of a discernment process, I asked everybody for help because I was like, I don't know what I'm being called to do. And I need help with discernment. I need help with execution. I mean, this is way beyond my capability. I was a lawyer at the time. Like, I was like, how could I start a spiritual center? Who am I to do that? Like, here, we need to gather a team. So, and I have another lawyer friend at the time who said, Mabeth, I am so stunned that you're willing to accept so much molding of your vision. And I was like, well, I'm accepting the help because I need the help. Like, and I had this idea for a name and they were like, no, that's not the name. That's not the metaphor. And it turned out to be a metaphor of a well that we form, which you go and fill up and go back out and go be spiritually nourished. And anyway, it was fascinating. So in that type of setting, it's very interesting. I'm good at asking for help because I know I'm so limited in that arena. But in other areas, I'm like, well, I can do that. Let me jump ahead and do that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it connects with life as a process of saying goodbye to a lot of things that we can do and then can't do, and kind of our world getting a little bit smaller in a lot of different ways. And I do think we are more attentive to it if we choose to be as we get older.
Yeah. Yes. And honestly, we have more time. I was reflecting on that. Like, we have more time as we get older. Those early years in life where you're just, career, we sign up for the career. I'm blessed enough to be having raised a family and but we throw ourselves into life early on, right?
Well, I know, I feel like we start running to get somewhere we think we're supposed to be.
And then you kind of get there and you're like, is this where I am happy here?
Yeah.
Right. That was kind of me practicing law. Like I, was working my way up the chain and I was like, I just don't think this is it. And honestly, doing what I do now, this is it. I love what I do. Like there's no question that helping care for people spiritually and their spiritual wellness, helping encourage that. And
what does that mean to you? What is the doing of that? I mean, spiritual wellness, and somebody, you talked about doing a program, wellness for work, and these are catch fuzzy words, but what does that mean to you?
Absolutely know in my heart that the spiritual dimension of being human is completely overlooked, neglected to the
what is the spiritual dimension of being human?
Paying attention to something larger out there, paying attention to it's not you alone. There's a larger source of goodness at work. And I call that God, but other people can call it other things. But it's also paying attention to what's going on inside of you. Mm-hmm. Like what is, like for me, it was a huge, I mean, this cannot be overstated. The importance of learning how to be silent by myself, because I'm a raging extrovert and a number 7 who hops and is very enthusiastic. And as a result, I would get myself mired in all sorts of things that I didn't need to be doing. Mm-hmm. So learning how to be silent and learning contemplative practices helps center me and helps me know what to say yes and no to, which for me has helped save me from myself.
Yeah. I mean, the spiritual side of being human, Brene Brown defines spirituality as the belief that we are all inextricably connected to one another and to something greater than ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, I like that. And I think it's the other aspect of spirituality is acknowledging like the sacredness, right, of everything around you, right? For me, spirituality is so relationship oriented. Like it's how do I learn how to better love others, love the world, love myself in balance, right? Like to me, I'm sent on the face of the earth to learn how to love and be loved. And I believe that we're all sent there. And I think we're about the work of love, trying to figure out how to do that. And it's very messy.
I think Richard Rohr just said that the other day, or one of the meditations to come out of Center for Action and Contemplation.
Well, it's not original. I think it's as old as time.
Well, and then, somebody I just interviewed was saying they don't have an original idea. And to me, that's okay, because it's perennial wisdom, but you and I are original and our experiences are original. Therefore, the wisdom becomes alive.
So this is hilarious. I'd never even relate. So I know we were talking about grief. So it was February 2nd, 2002. And I was watching a movie, Moulin Rouge. Mm-hmm. It's such a quirky movie. And my husband had given up on it. He was like, this is too weird for me. I'm going to bed. It was so unlike me to just follow through in this quirky movie. But at the end of the movie, the man, I think it's Christian, ironically, was standing on stage, and he's on stage by himself. And he goes, the greatest lesson in life you'll ever learn is how to love and be loved. And I just burst out crying. I was like, that's it. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, I just started crying. I was like, that is such truth. Mm-hmm. And with that, I went to bed. It was like midnight. My phone rang at like 6 a.m., which was super early. It was my mother calling to say that my beloved grandmother had died at 97. And we were kind of on death watch, but so it wasn't a surprise. But it was like I connected the two, the source of love, grief, like all of that together. And it was like one of those moments in life that you carry with you. That's why I was like, we did our whole homily around loving and being loved. But I think we're in the living classroom of love here on the face of the earth.
Yes. And I feel the need, which is my own problem, to be clear that the love I believe you're talking about is more than the sentimental
romantic love. Oh yeah, no
love.
No, it's the hard nitty gritty.
I know. I wish there was. I want a different word in English that can encompass the love, capital L, which can also be a part of grief and grieving. I don't know. Yes, I just felt the need to say that, but
100%. Oh gosh. Yeah, there is sentimental love and there is the nitty gritty love, messy, hard love, like the estranged families. Navigating that.
What would you, if we were in a class right now about navigating what's hard at the holidays, what would you encourage people in the class to do for themselves? How would you encourage them to be?
We call that the toolbox, right?
Yeah, what would be some of your tools?
Toolbox. Okay. Yes. I would encourage, number one, acknowledging I am sad. This is sadness. Number two, self-compassion, being gentle with yourself, being kind to yourself. Number three, giving yourself permission to just be in timeout, right? Like just to care for yourself in whatever way you need to. I also believe in the power of ritual, which you are a priest, so you know all about that. But for the average Jane and Joe who aren't think of only rituals related to church, it could be just lighting a candle by your loved ones or by something that's making you sad as a symbol for that, whether it's a loved one that's passed or just creating some sort of, if it's something you need to let go of, like maybe some sort of expectation that is really making you sad, that just something, just saying a short little mantra or prayer to let go of it. The rituals are so big for grief and so helpful. And it's just a physical embodiment of acknowledging the sadness.
And it creates a container. Like if there's a beginning, a ritual has a beginning and a middle and an end.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. So if you look back at the pandemic, this was like a global ritual at one point, or, you know, where people were putting teddy bears in the windows. Right? I don't know whether you remember that early on. And I mean, they're just little symbols that people can do if one's grief is related to loss of a loved one. Having a symbol of that loved one at the table or in your space is really helpful. As somebody in my class, and when I was in that master's program, we had a classmate who died suddenly of a heart attack. And for the rest of the semester, we had a candle in his space. His chair was empty, and it was such a beautiful, it was a beautiful modeling of what we can all do, right? That space was occupied by him for his, you know, it was just a ritual that really helped everybody.
Well, and it acknowledged an absence.
Yeah, true. Back to the acknowledgement.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mabeth, for talking about this with me and sharing some of your story.
You are welcome. You are welcome. It's been my honor. I love talking with you, Ariane. So thank you. It's an honor to talk with you.
Okay. Well, until the next one. Bye.
Bye.